building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Liz Kreutz in for Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live here on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We're asking experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. So today we're going to be looking at the travel nightmare unfolding across the country right now. Thousands of flights have been canceled or delayed due to the spread of COVID. So many travelers have even had to rethink their plans because of it. So we're going to talk to a travel industry analyst about what people should do if they are in this situation and how to avoid the travel headache in the future. But first, with 2022 right around the corner, health experts are weighing in on what they see for the future of the pandemic. UCSF's chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Bob Wachter, recently spoke about masking, booster shots, and the demand for COVID tests. He is also feeling optimistic despite the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. Dr. Bob Wachter is joining us live now. We have a lot to cover today. Thanks for being here, Dr. Wachter. You know, we are in the midst of a very busy time right now. A lot of people traveling, gathering with family and friends, as we mentioned. How critical is this week in terms of understanding what's next for the pandemic?
Well, it's already been critical because up until last week, we really didn't have good data on the severity of Omicron. We knew that it's far more transmissible than the prior variants, and we knew that it evaded the immune system to some extent. And this week, we've gotten a lot of good news about severity. It does seem to be significantly less severe than Delta, and particularly in a place like the Bay Area that is really one of the most vaccinated regions in the United States. At least so far, we're seeing a ton of new cases. That number is going up very fast, but we're not seeing a huge increase in hospitalizations. We're beginning to see the earliest signs that we're going to see increased hospitalizations, but I don't think we're going to see overwhelming numbers the way we might have if we saw the same number of cases from Delta.
That is very good news. And I was going to ask you really what you do predict for the coming days and weeks. You know, I have many friends in New York who have been sounding the alarm about how bad the situation is there. I believe 1 in 60 people in Manhattan tested positive for Omicron, or at least positive for a variant last week. Is that what we should expect here in the Bay Area? Is that sort of what's happening in New York, what we can expect to come here?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a ton of cases. I mean, if you're like me, you're getting calls from friends and relatives more than you ever have over the past 2 years about, I got it, I was exposed to it, what do I do? And that's even in vaccinated people. So it is clear that we're going to see a lot of cases, but that's bad. Obviously, we'd prefer to see fewer cases because those cases, first of all, some people will get fairly sick and they can transmit the virus, and a small percentage will get long COVID. So it'd be better to have fewer cases, but we got a lot of them. The issue is how many of them will lead to severe cases, will lead to hospitalizations, ICU stays, and deaths. And at least so far in the Bay Area, not so much. In other parts of the country, more than we're going to see here, because it does seem like the main thing that protects people is the level of immunity they have. And we have a ton of people in the Bay Area who've gotten 2 shots, a pretty good number who've gotten 3 shots. And it's looking so far that with Omicron, you're going to see a lot of cases and a lot of illness. But if you've had 2, and particularly you've had 3 shots, you have a very high level of protection to prevent you from needing to go to the hospital and getting very sick and dying.
So right now, a lot of people, as they're meeting with family and friends, are trying to weigh the risk of gathering. And even for people, let's say you're fully vaccinated, you've been boosted, but you're an older person, maybe you're over 70, you know, should you still feel comfortable being able to gather with people right now, just knowing that Omicron seems to be less severe than Delta?
Yeah, I have a set of ground rules that I tend to use, and that is that I am happy to get together with a small group of people who I know have been vaccinated and boosted and are being careful in terms of mask wearing, and would call it off if they felt ill. Even if they had a sniffle or had a sore throat in the morning, that would call it off. If that's the case, I feel comfortable getting together with that group of people. If any of those people are at particularly high risk of a bad outcome, and that really would be maybe somebody over 80, or someone who was immunosuppressed for whatever reason, then I think it's absolutely reasonable, if you can find them, for everybody to get a rapid test an hour or 2 before that get together. If everybody tests negative on a rapid test, I think then the get together is perfectly safe. I don't do rapid tests for all get-togethers, but I think if you want to have that extra margin of safety. If people test negative on one of the rapid tests a few hours before the encounter, then you can be very comfortable that it's a safe encounter.
Right. I think I took 5 at-home rapid tests over the past week just to be able to gather in a small group.
Right.
And that was my question. I mean, I then felt comfortable with my family. We were all boosted, vaccinated, had a rapid test. How accurate are those tests?
They are extremely accurate when you know the question you're asking. And the question you're asking is this person infectious now? It's not the same as what a PCR tells you, which is, does that person have COVID? You can have COVID and you just haven't reached the point of infectivity yet. The rapid test is very accurate. Now, there's a little bit of early data with Omicron that there may be a short window, perhaps 24 to 40, perhaps 12 to 24 hours, on your first day of infectivity where the test might be negative and you're infectious. So if the question is it 1,000% certain if I have a negative rapid test that I'm not infectious? The answer is no. But if you've taken all of the other precautions, everybody is vaccinated and boosted, you put in some ventilation, all of those things, everybody feels fine. I think if everybody has a negative rapid test, I would feel very comfortable that that's a safe get-together. Okay,
that is good to hear for a lot of people. Of course, it's challenging to get those tests, which we'll talk about in a minute. But as we're talking about what to do if you test positive or recommendations, we just learned that the CDC is changing their recommendations for quarantining. Can you speak about those new guidelines?
Yeah, what the CDC did half hour ago is change their recommendations for, it's actually isolation because it's really what we're talking about, what someone should do if they test positive. So if someone has COVID, the question is how long they need to stay out of commission. The old recommendation was they stay out of the workplace and don't come in contact with anybody for 10 days. Which is a lot to ask, and for people in essential services, like in a hospital, nurses, doctors, but what we're seeing with the airlines, even people who, flight attendants, if they've got to be out of the workforce for 10 days, that is a very big deal. What the CDC has done is said that if the person feels perfectly fine, that staying out for 5 days is enough. Now, I think that is prudent at a societal level because the vast majority of people, if they feel perfectly fine 5 days after their positive test, they're no longer infectious. There will be a few people that are still have a lingering infection and still are potentially infectious on day 6. So if it were me, I would have added that they should at very least wear a mask on the few days after that, let's say days 6 through 10. And if you want to be super safe, and if it were me, I would do a rapid test on day 5 to be sure that it's negative, because a very small percentage of people will still have a positive rapid test, and they should still not be in circulation. So as a general rule, I think it's a reasonable policy, but I would have added masks and a negative rapid test on that last day just to be extra careful.
Well, that's good to hear. People can keep that in mind. I did find it interesting, though. I believe that the CDC did say that if you've been boosted and then you're exposed to COVID, that you don't need to quarantine so long as you wear a mask.
Yeah, I think that's also prudent. That there, and part of this is, yes, there is some chance that you're going to get COVID from that exposure, but to take all of those people out of circulation, particularly if you're vaccinated and boosted, the chances you're going to have a bad case of COVID that lands you in the hospital is now getting very, very, very low. It's not zero, but very, very low. If you're 80 years old, maybe it's a little higher than that. And so I think what they're doing is sort of thinking across society as we learn about Omicron, that it is milder in people who've been vaccinated and boosted. We've got to be thoughtful about what the rules are, because there are real costs of pulling people out of society, and we start talking about the schools again. I think these are sensible rules, given that we're learning that Omicron in vaccinated and boosted people does seem to be less severe.
For sure. All right, I'm getting the wrap that we got to take a break, but we're going to continue chatting during the commercial break, and then we'll come back and talk more about that 4th booster, a rise in hospitalizations among children, and other COVID news. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, Dr. Wachter, I do want to ask you about what you said about testing after 5 days, because I've heard mixed messaging. I was even just talking to a colleague who said she had a family member who tested positive and was told not to take a test after 10 days because you might test positive, even if you're not actually still, really infected with it. So there's sort of mixed messaging there.
Yeah, no, the messaging is tricky because you're talking about different tests. So if you talk about a PCR test, you can still test positive 10 days out, sometimes people 15 to 20 days out. It's picking up tiny levels of virus and often picking up dead virus. It's not important. But the rapid test is a really, really good test of whether you're still infectious. So if you are 5 days out and you do the rapid test and it's still positive, you have to assume that you're still infectious. Very, very few people will still test positive in 10 days, but I've heard of a few that'll test positive in 10 days. And if it's testing positive, I believe it. It still means that you have enough virus in your system to, if it's enough to turn the rapid test positive, it means you're at least theoretically still infectious. The PCR doesn't mean that at all.
Okay, so basically you're saying that take an at-home test, not a PCR test after 5 to 10 days.
If I'm using the test as my measure of could I infect someone else,
right.
PCR is not the right test. It may stay positive for days and weeks, and it really doesn't mean anything. The reason is it's an amplifier. It can pick up such a tiny amount of virus that, yes, you still have a virus in you, and it may very well be dead virus, but we know very well that you're not still infectious. It turns out that the rapid test does this one thing really well, which is if you're positive, it says you've got enough virus in you that you could potentially infect somebody. So it really is the rapid test that you're looking for to say, all right, this person is no longer infectious.
Right. Okay, that's very helpful to know because I know a lot of people have been asking me about that and I didn't know that difference. So that's helpful. Okay, I think we're about 10 seconds. I know, thanks for explaining it. We're about 10 seconds back, so stand by. Welcome back. We're joined by UCSF's chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Bob Wachter. And Dr. Wachter, I wanted to ask you now about, we're learning about a rising number of children who are hospitalized with COVID right now, which is obviously very concerning. What do we know about why this is happening and the ages of these children?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is first of all, it's still very, very small numbers. You know, the vast majority of kids who get COVID will do fine, will not get very sick, will not need to go in the hospital. So although we're seeing rising cases, and that's concerning, the raw numbers are very, very small. But in many communities, and particularly in a place like the Bay Area, which is so highly vaccinated, the little kids are really, in many places, the only ones who still are unvaccinated. And because Omicron is so much more contagious than prior variants, if they're exposed to it, there's a good chance they're going to get infected. So I do worry about the little kids, and it's one of the reasons that when people say, oh, if Omicron is much milder, let's just let her rip and everybody's going to get infected. You still have little kids around who are not vaccinated. You still have people who are immunocompromised who may have been vaccinated, but the vaccines didn't take very well. So you might say if it's just unvaccinated people who've made a choice to be unsafe, that's one thing. I don't particularly want them to get infected either, but they've made a personal choice. But the little kids haven't, the immunocompromised people haven't, and that is a good reason to try to stay safe and try not to get COVID if you can avoid it. And there are going to be some people who get it, even if they're vaccinated, and will get very sick, although you are quite protected if you've gotten boosted.
Right. So, you know, with kids returning to school now in just a few weeks after winter break, they've been traveling, they've been with their family, they've been socializing. How concerning is that for you as we see this rise in hospitalizations?
Well, concerning, although, yeah, I mean, we are not seeing much of a rise in hospitalizations, more of a rise in cases. And so it means there's a lot of COVID around. There's a lot of Omicron around. It's very transmissible. I think we are going to see more outbreaks in the schools. I think if we learned anything in 2020, we've got to do everything humanly possible to keep the schools open. And so I think we're going to have to sort of really think carefully about how do we make the schools as safe as possible? What is the minimum amount of isolation and quarantine that makes sense when a kid does get infected? I think the idea of taking a whole class and canceling it because one kid was infected doesn't make sense anymore. That is a good use of rapid tests, because if someone's been exposed but they are testing negative, then I don't think you need to quarantine them. I think there's good evidence they can be back in class, as long as I think everybody needs to mask and be a little bit careful. But because the rapid tests are so good, we need access to them to be sure that we can keep a class going if there's one kid who gets COVID.
Well, let's talk about boosters now, and this talk that potentially there's going to be a need for a fourth booster. How likely do you think that will be?
I think it's up in the air. Israel last week announced that they were going to go to a second booster or a fourth shot because of early evidence that your immunity after your booster is incredibly high for about 3 months and then begins to wane yet again. They canceled that plan today. I'm not sure where they stand on it now, because they're seeing, yes, your immunity is waning, but they are also seeing what we're seeing, which is not a big uptick in hospitalizations. And so we may in this tricky position where it is clear that your immunity is beginning to wane after 3 or 4 months after your first booster. And yet, if we don't see any significant rise in hospitalizations and people with that single booster still are very safe in terms of preventing severe illness, then I think we have a judgment call to make. Do we continue to boost people to try to prevent infections, or do we say you're very, very well protected against severe cases, you don't need a booster? At this point, I think it makes sense to hold tight and not give someone and not take a second booster. There's a little bit of a risk that we can overboost. It turns out your immune system, if you see too much vaccine, begins to go to sleep a little bit. There's something called immunity maturation that your immune system needs a little bit of time to kind of get its act together. So I think there's enough questions up in the air, and because Omicron appears to be milder so far, that I think if you had 2 shots and and your booster, I would hold tight. I would not get a fourth shot yet.
So you talk about potentially over boosting, but we also have some, the flu shot, and there's some people who have said that maybe over time getting a COVID shot will be like a flu shot. So how does that differ?
Yeah, that won't surprise me at all, that if it turns out that every year we need to get a booster because A, our immunity has waned, and B, the virus has shape-shifted so that the old shots don't work quite as well anymore. In flu, that's most of what's happening. First of all, it's a very seasonal virus, so we only worry about it during the winter. Second of all, every year a new flu strain comes out, and so the booster you get is specifically rejiggered for that strain. That won't surprise me at all if we end up getting a booster every year for COVID. Maybe we get them both at the same time. You get a flu and a COVID shot. Both of them are reformulated every year against the variant that is at play. But the question that we're really asking now is, does a slight decrease in the efficacy of your 3 shots against a symptomatic infection, but not necessarily against a severe infection, does that merit all of us going ahead and getting a 4th shot next month? And I'd say the answer to that right now is let's hold our horses and see what happens.
With Omicron potentially being less severe, especially for people who are vaccinated and boosted, does that indicate that potentially we're coming to the end of this pandemic?
Every time I've predicted that, I've been wrong, so I don't particularly want to predict that again. There is a happy scenario here, and the happy scenario is that Omicron takes over for Delta, and that looks like it's likely to happen. Everybody has immunity to it eventually, either through vaccination or if you're not vaccinated, you're almost certainly going to get it. And it's milder. And it also this surge only lasts 2 months, which is what South Africa is telling us. So if that's the happy scenario, and the happy scenario would say by March, everybody has immunity against this thing, and if you get it, and you might get a case every now and then, but since you're vaccinated or you've seen it before and have immunity to it, you're going to get a mild case. It really now is, quote, like the flu, not like that lie that's been told for 2 years, but truly is like the flu, and we just sort of suck it up and say, all right, we're going to deal with it. That's the happy scenario. The problem is every happy scenario over the past 2 years has been followed by a curveball that has changed the ball game. And so I'm reluctant to say with any security that that's where we're going to end up. But if everything goes really well, and that would be unusual for COVID, then that's where we might find ourselves in March or April.
Oh, I hope so. As my colleagues know, I'm planning a wedding for June, so let's cross our fingers that can happen.
Yeah. The problem with June, I'm more confident about March and April than I am about June, but I'm,
okay,
I'm hoping.
Don't tell me that now. Don't tell me that now. I'm getting the wrap anyways.
Yeah.
Dr. Wachter, thank you so much. We always appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye. All right, coming up next, it's a situation so many people found themselves in this holiday weekend, being stranded at the airport. Thousands of flights were canceled because of COVID. We're talking live to an expert about what to do to avoid travel headaches in the future. Stick with us. We'll be right back. All right. Hi, everybody on Facebook. Now I'm curious what Dr. Wachter meant about June not being as great of a month. We'll see what I'll have to follow up on that. Okay, let me see if I can see the comments from all of you. I hope you all had a great Christmas weekend and you're all staying safe and healthy. I'm having a hard time finding your comments. Hold on. Here we go. Some Alex, by June, another variant will exist. That is true. Very good point. It could happen, but I really hope not. This is not the news I want to hear. So tell me in the comments, guys, what you did for the holidays. Did you travel? Did you take a rapid test so you could see your family? Did you cancel your plans because of Omicron fears? Do you have friends that are stranded because of these flight issues? We're going to be talking to an expert about it all, about what to do and advice if your flight is canceled. So if you have any questions about that, let us know as well. And we have about 1 minute left. And for some reason, I'm still having a hard time seeing all these comments. So let me try and figure that out. Oh, there we go. I'm reading your comments. All right, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Frustrations are growing at airports from coast to coast right now. Thousands of flight delays and cancellations have stranded travelers returning home from the holiday weekend. Airlines say there's an increase in COVID cases among pilots and crews. So what should people do if their flight is canceled, and what can you do now to avoid travel headaches in the future? Joining us live with some insight is travel industry analyst at Atmosphere Research, Henry Hartefelt. Henry, thanks for being here. What are we seeing right now nationwide in terms of flight cancellations, and how much are related to COVID versus other factors?
Well, we're seeing a lot of flights that are canceled because of COVID. We don't know the precise number, though, because not all airlines choose to share that. Latest I saw was more than 1,200 flights canceled and many thousand more delayed. But there has been some bad weather in certain places, such as the Pacific Northwest, which is contributing to these problems.
So we often hear of flight delays and cancellations during this time of year, as you mentioned, because of weather. That's pretty normal. But to have this amount of cancellations, at least in part because of crews being sick, it seems pretty unprecedented.
It is unprecedented, but we have to understand that we're going through a lot of things for the first time. Last year, we went through COVID for the first time. Then we had the Delta variant. But now we have the Omicron variant, which is affecting vaccinated, even boosted individuals. And that's where airline employees are vulnerable. The large airlines, United, Southwest, American, Delta, all have 88% or more of their employees vaccinated at this time. Yet they, like many of us, are getting sick with COVID because the Omicron variant can go around the vaccines. So the airlines are being caught by this. And as a result, they've had to cancel a lot of flights, thousands of flights, starting Christmas Eve.
So do you think airlines were really prepared for Omicron and how it would impact the holiday travel season?
I don't think that airlines were prepared for Omicron having such extensive impact on their employees, and that they didn't realize that so many of their flights were vulnerable as a result. Now, what's unfortunate is some airlines have partnerships with research hospitals and clinics, and you'd think that those clinics or hospitals would have said to their airline customers, hey, you should be prepared for this. Your employees are vulnerable just like anybody else. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that was the case.
This has really become such a mess for so many travelers. So what should people do if their flight is canceled? Is it easy to get a refund?
Well, so let's break it down.
Okay.
First, if you have started your trip, you want to get home. And so number one thing, regardless of where you are when this happens, Be nice to the person you're speaking to. If it's over the phone or in the airport, they have the power to help you or not. And they've been under a lot of stress. If you have not started your trip and you still want to go and the airline tells you the flight has been canceled because of COVID, you can ask for a refund. Most airlines, though, will encourage you to take a travel voucher. It's valid for a year or more. And some airlines may even offer sweeteners such as bonus frequent flyer miles or a higher dollar amount of credit if you take the credit versus a cash refund. If you are in the middle of your trip and the airline cancels your flight on your way home, you could try to ask for a refund, but really what you want is to get home. My advice is tell the airline you want to get to where you're going, see if they can get you there on one of their flights or on another airline. Most airlines, except for Southwest, can put you on other carriers if space exists.
Oh, that is really good to know. And what about booking a backup flight? Since a lot of airlines are allowing more lenient cancellation policies, do you recommend booking a second backup flight just in case your first flight gets canceled?
Well, so let's look at it this way. You're right. A lot of airlines have eliminated the change fees that they used to have before COVID. So if you do cancel a reservation, you get 100% of that airfare credited back to that you can use towards another trip. Generally, you have about 12 months to book the next flight and roughly as much as a year to take it. But do you really want to be a bank giving a zero interest loan to an airline? If you book a refundable ticket, you get all your money back, but that's an expensive proposition. And remember, if you book a seat, that means you're taking it away from someone else. So I don't really recommend doing that.
All right, that's good to know. Several cruise ships have been turned away from ports recently due to sick passengers. How are cruise lines handling this, and are they compensating people for disrupted travel?
They are. So in the case of cruise lines, many cruise lines are saying you have to be vaccinated to get on the ship. Then they're doing COVID tests either before you board or even after, maybe both. Their crews are vaccinated and tested. And yet again, just like with airlines, Omicron is getting some people sick. If a cruise line is not
Unfortunately getting the wrap, but let's keep talking during commercial break. So stay on the line with me right now. But those watching here on air, will be right back in just a minute. All right, Henry, we're still streaming online. Sorry about that. I apologize for interrupting you. Keep going. You were talking about the cruise ships.
Right. So if you are on a cruise ship and it cannot go to the port, usually what they will do is give you a partial refund, either a food and beverage credit or a credit towards a future cruise to compensate you. If the cruise itself is canceled, that's when the cruise lines usually give you not only a refund, but more of a credit.
All right, good to know. So just final question, I think I have maybe a minute here streaming. What's 2022 going to look like? We were just talking to Dr. Bob Wachter from UCSF about just the unknowns of next year. Are you seeing a lot of people booking travel?
Well, right now the industry is saying that 2022 looks good. And we will find out more in a few weeks when they start to release their December quarterly results and talk more about 2022. But just like the doctor said, it's going to be a year of unknowns for the travel industry. People want to travel. Our research shows people want to travel. We're tired of being held prisoner at home, if you will. But COVID is still going to be out there. I think a lot will depend on how vaccines go, how the development of other medications such as pills that can prevent it or treat it. So I'm hopeful that the industry will have a good year. I'm hopeful we'll all be able to travel with far more certainty than we have this year.
Oh, we all hope that. We need that. All right, Henry, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. All right, thanks so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We talked about the CDC recommendations for a shorter isolation time for people with COVID, the latest on the spread of Omicron, and what to do if you're caught up in a holiday travel nightmare. We talked with Henry Hartefelt, our travel experts. Again, we're here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream, answering your questions in real time. Thanks again for sending us your questions. World News Tonight is next, and Dan and I will see you at 4.